Hi guys, welcome back to another informative Sunday session. So today I'm going to explain the two differences between pointed pen calligraphy and broad edge calligraphy. So the first difference between the broad edge and the pointed pen calligraphy is the calligraphy tool that you use to write. So if you look at pointed pen calligraphy, mostly it's either similar to a pointed brush pen, or you have a pointed nib that you add on to a holder and you create the thick and thin variations using pressure application. Calligraphy, the tool that is used has a flat nib or a broad nib that has been cut to an angle so that you can change the angle of writing to create the thick and thin stroke variations. So because the calligraphy tool and the nature of the tool is different, the means to creating a guideline for writing pointed pen calligraphy and broad edge calligraphy are different. So usually for pointed pen calligraphy, you can choose a certain X height and then create a ratio between the ascender to the descender space with respect to this X height. So here it's typically 2:1:2. So that's the ratio of creating a guideline. Then the next most important aspect of creating a guideline for pointed pen calligraphy is the angle of slant. So if I consider this to be my baseline, the angle of slant is at 55 degrees or 52 degrees for Spencerian with respect to the baseline. Pointed pen tool, you have to align the pen along the angle of slant. Like how similar to pointed pen, you can create thick and thin strokes using pressure application. The same concept of thick and thin strokes are created using the broad edge pen by changing the angle. So if I try to go horizontal when I hold the pen along the baseline, I create a thick shade. But if I go vertical while still holding the pen along the baseline, I get a thin stroke. So there is not much of pressure application here. It's just how you use the tool. So if I try to use this pen at 90 degree to the baseline, then I get a solid barrel. But if I keep changing the angle from 90 to 45 to 30 and then even further, you'll see that the shade thickness keeps changing and it's more of a trapezium rather than a rectangle. So this is the difference between the thick and thin shades that you can create with a pointed pen as against a broad edge calligraphy pen. So for broad edge calligraphy, like say foundational hand, the means to creating a guideline is based on nib widths. You create nib widths. So this is the nib. Depending on the size of the nib, you'll be able to create nib widths, and this is how you create nib widths. So by just creating small squares and placing them one over another, you will get what's called as the nib width. So once you decide the nib width, so for broad edge style like foundational hand, the ratio is usually 3 nib widths, 4 nib widths is to 3 nib widths. So while 4 nib width is my X height, 3 nib width is my ascender, and another 3 nib width will be my descender space. So the ratio of making these guidelines between pointed pen and broad edge are different. Next comes the angle of writing broad edge in comparison to a pointed pen calligraphy. So like in pointed pen calligraphy, we saw that we create the slant lines along with the guideline, so you can align the pen along that angle. However, in a broad edge calligraphy style, you hold the nib at the specified angle and then you follow through with the script. For example, foundational hand is written at 30 degrees, which means I have to keep the pen in such a way that the flat portion of the nib is at 30 degrees to the baseline. So if this is the baseline, my angle has to be at 30 degrees. So this angle is at 30 degrees. So I have tilted the pen at 30 degrees from the baseline. The flat portion of the script should be written at 30 degrees to the baseline. And one more difference that you can point out between pointed pen and broad edge calligraphy style is there's no concept of connections or cursive lettering that is possible with broad edge. But in a pointed pen style, you can always connect the letters and write in a cursive format. So in a nutshell, the tool that you use to create pointed pen calligraphy in comparison to a broad edge calligraphy is different, while pointed pen calligraphy is written with tools that are pointed, so which means you apply pressure to create the thick and thin strokes. But in broad edge calligraphy, the tool that is used has a flat nib or a broad nib that has been cut to an angle so that you can change the angle of writing to create the thick and thin stroke variations. The next difference is the guidelines that you are creating and the ratio of writing between X height and ascender descender space. So for pointed pen calligraphy, you can choose an X height, say 2 mm or 3 mm. Based on the X height, you create the ascender and descender space, which can be twice the X height. Like say the ratio between ascender to X and descender can be 2:1:2. The angle of slant is at 55 degrees from the baseline, meaning you draw slant lines at 55 degrees from the baseline and you align your pen along that angle. However, in broad edge, since the tool itself is different, the guidelines are always created using nib widths, squares stacked on one on top of another using a broad edge or the nib that you are using, and then create the ratio as 4 nib widths in the X height space and 3 nib widths in the ascender and descender space. And this is typically for foundational hand. Regarding the angle of slant, foundational hand is written at 30 degrees from the baseline, which means the angle at which you hold the pen, that should be 30 degrees from the baseline. And the last difference is the concept of cursive. So there's no concept of cursive in a broad edge style. That's typically a print letter style. But in a pointed pen calligraphy, you can connect the letters and write in a cursive format. That's it for today. See you next week. Bye.